年确实找的人都不一样，所以随便，因为这种资源你爱要不要，说实在是这个样子。今天请的呢 Raphael，actually，我也不知道 last name 怎么 pronounce，他是 French。So Raphael actually graduated. I'm gonna switch to English right now. Raphael actually graduated from architecture department in Montreal University in Canada and worked for 2 years in Tokyo as an architect and urban planner. Now he's working actually in Myanmar and starting his own practice-based firm in Myanmar called Blue Temple. That's his firm. And they have started a series of initiatives from macro architecture proposals to public space design on urban scale and data-driven mapping projects on national level. So Raphael also has organized a series of free of charge architectural design workshops, free. Also in Hong Kong, so that's actually how we met. That promotes creative and critical thinking across the country in collaboration with local and international universities. So in the future, probably we're gonna invite Raphael come over to SuZhou and start doing some workshops. And today he's teaching actually master programs in the architectural school in I forgot, Yangon Technology University, something like that. That's his firm in Myanmar. It's called Blue Temple. So Blue Temple is an architectural design group based in Myanmar. By the way, Myanmar means 缅甸，就是缅甸。OK， 我猜你们一大人对不知道 Myanmar 是缅甸。Since 2018, augmenting computational design, promoting collaboration, and exploring new radical ideas. Their portfolio is composed of volunteer-based initiatives, free of charge design workshops, of course, and projects that seek social and environmental changes. I'm gonna just quickly show you some photos of his practices, small practices in Myanmar. That's his bookshelf. You're gonna see in the background, and some bamboo, primarily bamboo-based or bamboo-driven architecture. That's some models made by bamboo sticks, and some just playground for children, and some bamboo structures, just raw bamboo pools, basically from in Myanmar. That's him working with bamboo and some bamboo pavilions, similar to the project I have to show you from the beginning. And there's some renderings, bamboo projects, that's the finished product. So that's basically a firm that you have to do all by yourself. You have to design and you have to go to the site and work on your own projects. So, okay, I'm gonna just now give the floor to Raphael. Wait a sec. So, okay, I'm gonna mute myself. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. 所以我是法国人，那个建筑师法国人，在缅甸待着呢。I'm gonna speak in English but I don't know if everyone can understand everything I'm going to be saying. So I'm trying to maybe speak a bit slowly. If you have any questions, of course, don't hesitate to just raise your hand. But we'll have a Q&A at the end of this lecture. I've gathered a couple projects for you today, and we'll try to see how long it takes to go through them. So this lecture is called Advancing Architecture Design in Myanmar. So I don't know if you know where Myanmar is located. 中文叫缅甸，缅甸在那个it's between India, Thailand, and south of China, not so far in the south of Kunming. So actually, I'm not so far from you guys, but unfortunately, I was not able to come. Hopefully, I'll be able to come for a workshop soon. But anyways, Advancing Architecture Design in Myanmar. Okay, so I actually started my practice, my architecture profession in Japan. And in Japan, I was working for a French company, and we were designing master plans in China, but also residential, commercial projects. And I worked in Japan for a company called Richard Blia Associates for 2 years in Tokyo. And I had a feeling that like the projects were interesting and I was learning a lot, but unfortunately, like I didn't have a really sense of like real purpose in my work. It was mostly like commercial. I didn't really feel that my design in my work had a lot of, in English, you call it agency. So it was going to have a huge impact on the population. It was mostly like trying to promote different private companies and stuff like that. So after a couple of years working there, I learned the job that I'm doing now, which is doing architecture, but I wasn't satisfied with the actual projects that I was working on. And I wanted to do something different and something, try something different and trying to push to see how far I could push design agency. And I chose to come to Myanmar about in December 2016. So I quit my company, I arrived in Myanmar by myself, and I started to work on some personal projects. So Myanmar is a very amazing country. Like it's been under a military regime for a long time, and recently it's been gone through like a process of democratization. And from the first elections that happened 10 years ago, the country has started to be one of the most developing countries on the planet. It was developing actually more than China at that time. And so I saw a lot of potential going there. I thought that there was a lot of opportunities that I could maybe work with. And it's a beautiful city in Yangon, which is the ex-capital. Now the capital is in Naypyidaw. And the ex-capital, which is Yangon, has one of the most colonial architecture in Southeast Asia. And it's a really beautiful dichotomy between a very amazing culture, but then also like all these buildings are falling apart. So I thought it was maybe a place that that aligned a lot with my ideals and where there was a lot of opportunity. So I moved there by myself in 2016 with a backpack and settled down and tried to look for some projects. So the first thing I started doing is organizing free of charge architecture design workshops, working with different universities throughout Myanmar, from Yangon to Mandalay, all the way to Mijina, which is the capital of Kachin State, north of Myanmar, near Chinese border. And all these workshops were just a way to try to promote design agency, to promote the use of public space, and to engage students in computational design and thinking a little bit outside the box. And it was quite successful. We met a lot of students from all over Myanmar. And some of these projects just stopped at the end of the workshop. And then some of these projects continued and became actual projects that we end up building. And so I was thinking that maybe this is a good moment, a good time to put all these projects together into a company. So I registered a company, an architecture design studio in Myanmar, in Mien Dien, called Blue Temple. And now we've been here for about 4 years now. And so this is the website. Feel free to go and check out if you want more details about the project. So today I'm going to talk about a couple projects that we've worked on in the past 4 years. Again, if you have a question at any time, like please just raise your hand and we can unmute, or else we can just keep it for the Q&A. So the first project is looking at affordable housing. So very cheap housing in Myanmar, all built from bamboo. So there is an untapped, uncommodifiable, and abundant resource in Myanmar, which is very small bamboo. There's about 350 species of bamboo in Myanmar. So bamboo is very, very widespread in this country, but only a few of them, of these species of bamboo, are actually used in construction because of their load-bearing capacities. And they're quite expensive if you compare them to the other species. So I was thinking of a way to use the other species of bamboo and design a house that can take full advantage of their properties. so the question behind this project is really tackling the purpose of affordability. So when we're doing computational design, I feel that in many cases, that purpose of affordable housing, of affordability, is not necessarily taken into consideration. But I feel that computational design has that capacity to actually start to look at that dimension of design. And so how can computational design help to make your design cheaper than if you were to use AutoCAD or SketchUp? And so this was really the starting point of this project. Okay. So this is a quick rendering of the house that we were going to build. The point of this house is to be a modular system. So it would be a prefabricated modular bamboo affordable house that we would be building in a factory, large scale. And it would be easy to ship because we would be only building the structural frames of the house out of this small bamboo. And also, for example, the footing of the house will be designed specifically according to the maximum recorded flooding height of the specific sites on which we're going to be building. And so the design was designed with using Millipede, which is a topology optimization plugin on Grasshopper. And then from that final shape that Millipede generates, then we have to kind of reinterpret it, the results, and then find a way to assemble it using small bamboo. So in a way, it's a combination of high-tech design and also low-tech construction techniques, which are very important when we're working in places like Myanmar, because in Myanmar, of course, you have, like, when you look at architecture design softwares, it's very let's say, democratized. Everyone can use them. But how do you actually end up building them in a place where they've never actually seen this design before? And using conventional digital fabrication techniques, such as 3D printing, is very expensive and not necessarily accessible in places like here. So I was thinking that if we were to go through the digital fabrication, it needs to be very low tech. It needs to be done by workers who don't have experience with these types of construction, but they're also able to go through with them. So in this case, we extracted from the topology optimization, the ISO curves from the stress patterns and tried to model these small bamboo. And so here you can see some renderings from the inside where you have the structural frames and the rest of the house. All of this is using very local materials. And we're hoping that maybe one house would cost about $600 US, which is very cheap for the local markets. And so it's a modular system. So the point is that according to the size of the family household, according to the size of the land, according to the size of the budget, you can vary the size of the house. And so you can have all these different designs that take place within the basic structure. So we started working on different, like, small mock-up prototypes. And actually at this moment, while I'm speaking, we're actually building a full-scale prototype in the countryside. So this is an ongoing project that's going on at the moment. And yeah. So the next phase would be to actually start building a factory in the countryside and start to prefabricate this house. So the actual design comes from a vernacular design that is found in northern Myanmar in Kachin State, which is the vernacular Kachin longhouse. And within this longhouse, which is a specific type of, like, typology, architecture typology, you have all forms of formation of arrangements and program within it. And so we took the same idea, but then applied computational design to it to find a cheap way to massively produce them. So this was the first. This is the most recent project we worked on. But going back to one of the free architecture design workshops that I organized with the Yangon Technological University, where I teach the master's program of architecture, one of the first workshops we worked on was the redevelopment of kind of abandoned local public space in Yangon. And one of them was called the Minigong Park redevelopment. And it's in the center of Yangon. As you can see, the space is just very simple at the moment. It's at the corner of a large intersection with a flyover, and it's very noisy. And the space is not very designed. It's just like grass and then a pedestrian pathway, but there's not much to it. So we're thinking of finding ways to redevelop it to make it more user-friendly. So here you can see the plan of the space. The actual park is marked with a red boundary. So it's a very noisy place, but it has a lot of potential because it's really located within a very like socially like active neighborhood with a lot of social housing, residential area. It's quite active neighborhood in Yangon. And these are a couple shots that we took at nighttime. You can see that people are just simply sitting on the floor. There's a couple benches, a couple trees, but it's not being fully designed, right? It's just kind of a leftover space that people just use, and they really need it because there's very few public space in the city. But it's not actually a very well designed space. And we feel that maybe the space, because it's at it's at the crossway of different big roads, it has this potential to becoming a very active public space, a sort of civic center for the city. So it has potential, but it's not being actually fully developed. And during the daytime also, there's very few people who can use this space because it's so hot. The sun is very, very hot, and there's not a lot of shading. So it's mostly a space that's used as nighttime. So finding a way for shading specifically in the context of Myanmar is very important for public space, for people to actually be able to use it throughout the day. It's maybe a different context in SuZhou, but at least in Myanmar, the sun is really crazy. So one of the first ideas we came up with was the concept of pareidolia. So pareidolia is kind of the effect that we all have of kind of perceiving familiar effects in our neighborhood, even though there are none. So for example, this is a famous example on Mars, a picture that NASA took, where you can see there's a face on Mars, but actually no one really drew the face on Mars. Is this the people who can recognize it? And so a lot of people were thinking of alien life on the planet. But the point of this effect is that it's the ability of human beings to recognize familiar spaces within their environment. And so we thought this was a very interesting concept to take in consideration in the design of public space. And to take it a step further is to think of like, how do people from the community can see familiarity within public space, like familiar and comfortable spaces that they feel acquainted to within their environments. And this brings us to the notion of free space. So there's a very strong difference, I don't know if you're aware, between public space and free space. There was during 3 years ago, during the Italian Venice Architecture Biennale, the whole purpose of this exhibition was on free space and to show to people how these types of spaces can be much more interactive with the public. And so the basic difference is that free spaces allow a certain notion of engagement from the public, while public space is fully designed, is very rigid, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. Actually, public space allows for a certain sense of malleability and allows for the program to maybe change and for allowing the people to really engage with the space. So here in Pali Park, you can see that all the seats you can just pick them up and move them wherever you want. So sometimes you'll have a group of 3 people, sometimes you have a group of 10 people, and sometimes you have a group of 100 people. So you can rearrange the public space as you want. And this is a very interesting concept, especially in the context of the democratization of this country, where the government is trying to give more power, decisive power to the people in shaping the land. And so if we allow for this type of engagement in public space, then people will feel a little bit more empowered at a small scale in reshaping their own environments, immediate environments. And then the third notion that came to mind was the effect of parallax effect. I don't know if you've heard of parallax. This was a famous book that Stephen Hall, a Canadian architect, wrote about a lot. And it's basically the idea that every time you visit a space, the experience of the space is of course tailored by the architect through the design, but not only that, it's also, your experience is also personal. When you visit a space, you see it through your own eyes. And according to your position within the space, you will experience the space differently. So your experience is very personal while design is very public. And so how do we cultivate this personalization within public space and take it into consideration within the design itself? And so one of our references that we really loved is the Kanagawa Institute of Technology was designed south of Tokyo in Japan by Junya Ishigami, who's an upcoming young Japanese architect. And he tried to really kind of design his spaces looking at the possibilities of scenarios that can happen within the space that he designs. And so this drawing really is a reflection of these possible scenarios that can manifest themselves within the space. And I think this is a very beautiful idea of instead of trying to push for a specific design or a specific experience, trying to think how people will use it and then design according to that. And so the final design that he has is really simple. And this is what I find is the most interesting, is that it's a very complex way of thinking, but at the end of the day, the design itself is incredibly simple. There's a glass curtain wall, very simple steel structure, but then within the space, all these arrangements and programs are possible because of all the work that he's done before. And so for us, the starting point was to really look at the densities. So how people are using the space today. And so I asked my students to make a quick drawing. You can see the first sketch on the left, which shows the perception that the students have of the density of activities within the space. So the darker the color, the more people will go there. And then the lighter the color, the less people will go there. And again, this is based on site visits and also like taking photos and data collecting. And then from that first image, we plugged it into Grasshopper, and then we start generating some points, a cloud point. And so we used this plugin on Kangaroo, where we can actually generate enough points. So where it's the darker, we generate the most points, and then where it's the lighter, we generate the least points. And then we create this constellation of program that is based on the current use of the space at this moment. And then finally, from that understanding, we started designing this program where we think that naturally the people will gravitate to, where you have like more open areas that are more public, and then more secluded and small and dense area that is more private. And so it's really about playing with the sense of privacy and public use of public space. And then we started working on Blender, trying to map the site using color gradients. And then here you have your final design. So right now you can see the 3D model of the space the way it is today. So there's a big highway, it's very noisy. And so we're trying also to find ways to buffer the noise away from the public space to make it a little bit more intimate. And so from a plan point of view, you can see that so these are the existing trees, and then the color gradients from white to black shows the densities of recorded densities on the sites. And then finally, we start shaping the 3D model of the sites to buffer out and to create spaces, and especially to buffer out the sound that was coming from the highway. And then we designed this canopy. And so this canopy of trees is designed directly from that site analysis. So these points that we generated actually become columns. So the denser the points, the closer the columns will be to each other, and then the more intimate the space that the structure will create. And in the same way, we had the same logic, for example, with the canopy itself, with the height. So the more open the space, the higher the structure was, and then the higher it feels more open. And then we also had a third variable that we plugged in, a third parameter that we plugged into Grasshopper, which was the actual roofing itself. So sometimes it's completely transparent, sometimes it's semi-transparent, and sometimes it's completely opaque. And so all these variables and parameters on Grasshopper are able to generate directly like feelings that are based on the site analysis itself directly. So it's not just like you do the site analysis and then the design. There's a direct correlation between the two, and then the design comes directly from the understanding and perception of the sites. So this is just a quick rendering where you can see how people could use it. So this was a very theoretical project. We never actually built it. We have proposed it to the local governments, but it never really went through for different reasons. So the next project is called the Yangon Pipeline. So in Yangon, there's this massive water pipeline that brings the water for people to drink, the tap water, to the entire city. And this was built about 80 years ago. And it was built during the colonial era in Yangon. And the structure is still working today. And what's interesting about it is that this is a very like engineered government property, very secluded, very secretive. And after 80 years, there's a lot of people who started to live there on both sides of the pipeline. So I thought it was really interesting that actually public space sometimes doesn't need to be designed by architects. It can be actually designed by people themselves, right? And they just take this space and then use it the way they want. And this is a definite example of one of these types of public space. And people use the pipeline to walk on it. Children come here to play on it. On this picture, you see that there's urban farming. So there's a tons of like different types of program that generates and manifests itself along this very, very, very long pipeline. It's about like 60 kilometers, 10 kilometers from downtown all the way to the airport. Then it continues another 50 kilometers all the way to the reservoir where the water is treated before being pushed into the pipeline. And so it goes through all of Yangon, and it's really interesting. There's so many programs there, and of course there's a lot of informal settlements and slums that have developed along the pipeline. And so our focus was on one specific section of the pipeline south of, in the middle of the city, where we thought that there was the most like engagement with the infrastructure. And so the first thing we did when we started this project, instead of just applying design, is to really research. I feel that that's such an important part of a project. And I think that especially when I teach the local university, I feel that, you know, when I asked for a project, and the students, they see the design process as a checklist. Like, okay, we will do interviews, check. We will do site analysis, check. And now we have to do the design. But they don't really understand that there's a correlation and it really comes together. And the design really comes from the site analysis. And if you do really well the site analysis, then the design is actually very kind of naturally will come to you. It won't be as difficult. So the first part of this project was really trying to interview all the people who live in the slums around this area, trying to understand their lives, the way they live every day, the way they use the space every day. Then we did a lot of like documentation through photography. These are pictures that were taken by Matias Berkovic, a Spanish photographer, along the pipeline. You can see all the different ways people are using the pipeline, sleeping on it, showering on it, walking on it. There's a lot of urban farming, fishing, people just hanging out. And all this program is just absolutely incredible. It's very rich program. So there's a lot to work with if we were to actually start implementing some designs. So these are the kind of houses that you can see along the pipeline. And it's really being used like a pedestrian road. So it's people walk on top of it, and it's really like if you were on the sidewalk. People, it's so natural to walk there. People go to school, go to the local markets, go to the office using the pipeline. And so the idea was to kind of generate what I call urban acupuncture along the pipeline. So the pipeline is this artery, is like this pedestrian highway that crosses the city entirely. And along this highway, this pedestrian highway, there's a lot of possibilities of creating hubs, of like public space hubs, where a more developed kind of like program can manifest itself along the narrative, along this pedestrian walk. And so we actually looked at a couple of them, of these possibilities, and then we proposed it to the local university for students to design all these hubs for different types of program according to the local context. So some of them were more focused on education because there was a local school. Others were focused on urban farming. So it really depends on the context. And so the first project we built there was a bamboo playground for a local public school. So this is the 3D model that we did. And here you can see the video. So here you have the pipeline. And then right along the pipeline, you have this playground all built of bamboo that serves two different purposes. So on one side, it serves for the local school where you have the playground and then all the kids love to play on it. And then on the other sides, it serves as some sort of like installation for the pipeline, where there's lighting for nighttime. And so nighttime is a bit dangerous place. So if there's lighting, it can also make people feel more comfortable and secure to walk on it. And then it also creates this sort of installation for like an urban magnet for people to come and hang out on the pipeline. So this was built like about, I'd say 3 years ago. This was one of our first projects in Yangon. And I think that funding is also quite important parts. The way we found funding, of course, the local government here in Myanmar has very little money. So finding like a sustainable funding, a way to fund these projects are equally important. But for this project, we found a local charity group in Hong Kong called Design Trust. And so we were able to get a bit of funding from there. So here you can see at nighttime the way that the public space is engaging directly with the pipeline. And at nighttime, actually, a lot of people come to the pipeline, sit, and it becomes really like an urban magnet still today. And moving from academia to professional, we started inviting a lot of different partners and collaborators to come and design more hubs along this pipeline, because it has this potential, right? It's like 10-kilometer long. So you could design many different hubs along of it, and then you can walk along the pipeline. And then from time to time, you stop in one place, you stop in another, and it creates this journey. And another collaborator, which Sining, of course, knows very well, which is Christophe Kurla from LEED in Hong Kong, using bending active bamboo shell structures, they designed an urban farming center right in the middle of the urban farming fields along the pipeline. And so creating a new economic, or I'd say microeconomic opportunity from the people from the slums to actually make a bit of money by selling directly on the site the food that they're harvesting along the pipeline. So for this project, we actually unfortunately never got the building permits. So we were never actually able to build it, but hopefully this will happen soon. And then the third project along was done by Mavis Yip, which is another architect based in Hong Kong, lead designer of a group called MLKK. And this site was very interesting because it had to do directly with homelessness, with homeless people. And you can see in the model, there's the pipeline that goes beneath the highway. There's a big highway in the pipeline that goes beneath, and between the highway and the pipeline, there's an entire family of people that have been living there for 4 years. And so we were thinking that this is an interesting opportunity because it's an intersection between two main axes of the city. And so within this intersection, we can design a house, of course, for the people who live there, but also a program that can better connect different axes to make it more walkable. So dealing with the walkability of the city. And so here you can see a lot of more design process for designing this intersection. Also made out of bamboo. And then finally, this fourth location, which is called Plot ABC, that we've been working on for quite some time now. We were actually able to get the construction permits for this one. So this is the second site along the pipeline where we were able to get the political permits to build it. And so when we first arrived there, it was completely vacant, abandoned land. And so the first thing we started to do is to use triangulation using photogrammetric softwares. One that's called captured context capture, but Acute 3D, which is a French photogrammetric software. And so we were flying this drone on top of the site and recording all the points, and then 3D modeling the site for better site analysis. So it's quite a large site, and there was a lot of work to do on it, and we were helped by the local government. And then we finally were able to find funding through also Hong Kong, but also through local crowdfunding campaigns and donations. And after 2 years of work, we finally started construction and really fully renovating the entire place that was completely abandoned into a fully usable community public space. And so we started digging all these spaces from the ground. The soil is very malleable in this place because it's excrements that come directly from the local canal. So this is sedimentation that they collected on top of the sites. So actually the soil is very soft, which was very easy to carve into. So this was also one of our starting points for the design, that thinking that the land is not necessarily flat, it's very malleable, it's very easy to dig to. So maybe we can create topography in our own kind of like topography within this flat space. And so after finally finishing phase one, which was the basic landscaping brickwork and concrete work, we started working on the bamboo shells that came on top of the spaces. And to do so, we started building some mock-up prototypes in small villages around Yangon using bamboo to test the structure. You can see that there is a very strong cantilever that opens for the doors. And so we just wanted to know how strong the bamboo that we're using, that specific species of bamboo that we're using, how strong is it? And can it hold all the weight of the structure when we cantilever so much? And it was very successful. So then we learned a lot from this prototype, and then we replicated the prototype back into the site in Yangon. So here you can see the workers working directly on the final sites. This is for the concrete footing. And so giving a bit of a brutalist type of look for the footing. But the point is to kind of show the potential that bamboo architecture has in Myanmar. So bamboo architecture in Myanmar is a kind of very traditional building technique that they've been using for a really long time. But they've never actually like expanded or developed that technique further. So the architecture you see in Myanmar that is using bamboo is always kind of the same. And so here we are trying to show something completely new, and to show that bamboo is not just a traditional construction material, but it can become very modern, and it can take different shapes. It can serve different program, not just for houses, but also for public space, especially with the new techniques you have today in regards to the treatment process that allows to push the longevity of the bamboo for much longer time. So this is the final shot, the way it is, the way it looks like today. So this is a very community, small-scale public space design. And the next phase of it will be starting after rainy season in 6 months to build the main central football area that is designed currently by Christophe in Hong Kong. But we still need to find the funding for that. So now I'm just going to bring you through a much smaller scale project that you can actually see behind of me, which is the staircase in our office. So when I first rented out the office, it was very messy because we had a lot of things. So we were thinking of a way to combine all these different like furniture into one and allow to free the space a bit more. So this was how it used to look before. And the start of the design is to give a bit of fluidity in the space. So we wanted the space, because the ceiling is so low and the space looks really dark and there's not a lot of windows, we wanted to give it a more loose and free flow feeling inside the house. So it's less intense. So we use computational fluid dynamics, which is another plugin on Grasshopper. We use different softwares for that called computational fluid dynamics, where we try to generate an analysis that if we put, for example, this existing staircase within a wind turbine, what would the wind look like when the wind goes through the staircase? And then extracting these curves, and then finally generating that final shape that will become the staircase. so this gives it a very fluid and light type of feeling, which is very important for this office because it's just a little too small. And so we built a small model to test out the design. And finally, the construction process, which was very interesting. The actual start of this project was that I visited this factory in Yangon, which was one of the only places I've ever heard about where you can have like digital fabrication techniques using CNC machines and stuff like that. So the point of this project was really to find ways to test these machines and to find ways to actually see how we can, how good they are. And so this is a small project where we're just testing out these different construction techniques. And if they were to work out really well, then we could use them in the future for other projects. And again, this is still the idea of really working locally. So instead of just thinking about the design, you're thinking also about the construction and like what's available, what kind of techniques are available locally, and how far can you push them to design these things. So here we spent, it actually took only 21 day. It took like 1 day of work to build it. So it's actually quite successful. So we're really thinking about using this technique more and more in our designs. And so this is kind of like a hybrid furniture that mixes together the staircase, but also the bookshelf. And so it's able to completely free up a lot of space within the studio, because then we're mixing up together different furniture. There's a thought that comes to me, which is that when we talk about computational design, I have a feeling that like the design parts of computational design has been extremely like democratized. You can crack Rhino, you can download Grasshopper for free. All of you probably know that. You can find a lot of tutorials on YouTube. It's very easy to learn, and you have so many plugins that are for free on Food for Rhino. But when it comes to digital fabrication, it has not been democratized as much. And so when we work in low-tech kind of environments like in Myanmar, it's very important to kind of acknowledge this fact. And you don't have access to all the 3D printers you can find maybe in Hong Kong, but maybe you can find other ways of building them. So the construction becomes part of the design, and then these two merge together instead of being so separate. This is a little bit of a different project. It's not very architecture focused, but it still is in regards with computational design, and it's looking at mapping using Grasshopper. So we specifically looked at one of the states of Myanmar, which is Chin State at the border with Bangladesh and India. And it's one of the most rural states of Myanmar. And so basically it's one of the places where you have the least amount access to data in general. So I think that's really interesting when you start looking at mapping, because mapping relies heavily, of course, on data. But what if you start mapping in places where you don't have data? And then what kind of maps can you start generating from what you can have access to? So the starting point of this project was when I first arrived in Myanmar. I was by myself. I just quit my company in Japan, and I was looking for some freelance opportunities in the country, and some of them that came to me was mapping for like tourism development along the beaches in Rakhine states in south of Myanmar. And I was trying to find a way to have, again, the site analysis that directly expands into the design. And to do this, I really looked at, I started to find a way to map and to color gradient the value of the land. So here in this map, you can see that when it becomes really red color, it means where the site is the most valuable. And then when it becomes blue color is where the least valuable. And this index is based on a lot of different indicators that we're able to maybe tailor according to the perception of the clients in regards to, for example, views, accessibility, the slope of the land to see if it's constructible, etc. And I thought that this process of working was interesting. The outcome in this case was very commercial, but I was thinking that maybe in other projects, it could become, it could relate more to development in general instead of so focused on tourism. And so this like design kind of methodology that we created is in 5 points. The first one being where you're harvesting and mining the design, where you're collecting the design, the data, and then evaluating the data. Because, for example, if you find data on a satellite picture of the land, it will be a very different quality of data that if, for example, the local farmer gives it to you. So if you're able to kind of assess the quality and evaluate a sort of trustworthiness benchmark to every data set, then you're able to much more use them in the future to create these maps. Then the third point is data analysis, which goes through the Grasshopper. And then finally finding influencers and coefficients to model the final topography and to answer that question that we raised at the beginning of the project. So some of the data that we received is very clean, is very easy to use. It's an Excel spreadsheet. So there's a lot of plugins on Grasshopper where you can upload them into the platform. So these were quite conventional ways of recording data. And in other cases, we had like maps that were drawn by hand by local governments, especially in regards to the roads in the country. So again, this is very important for us to because there's not a lot of data in this place, we have to use everything we have. And to use everything we have to create a benchmark to know what is the quality of this data compared to that data. And then once we assess that quality, then we're able to mix it up and then use all of it. And the point is really to kind of not look at individual points, not look at individual points of data, but more looking at patterns and revealing patterns within the development. Because if you look at individual points of data, sometimes it's very inaccurate, it's very incomplete. And so there's a lot of mistakes you can make if you focus too much. But if you start mixing everything together and you look at the bigger picture, then you can have a much more reasonable understanding of the sites. So the whole point is to reveal the patterns and the underlying dynamics and developments in this region. And the maps we created from Grasshopper was made without any indicators. If you just look at the map, it's very easy to see where the densities are. And so you don't necessarily need to understand data. You don't necessarily need to understand English or even Burmese. You can just look at it, and if you just explain, then you can understand what's going on. So it's also trying to be able to democratize data in places where people don't necessarily have electricity. And for this one, I used the metaballs on Kangaroo to design these contour lines that show densities, but perhaps there's other visual representative vocabularies that are easier to understand. This was just the first test. And so there's a lot of different data that we collected in regards to activities of NGOs in the region, electricity, harvesting, population density, topography, roadmaps. And so the whole design is really based on what kind of data we're able to find. And here you can see that we're really trying to reveal different patterns. So for example, you have the education, the religious, agriculture, and you can see like where all these activities are focused on, like from a spatial point of view. And then you can try to maybe understand why that is. But at least on this map, you understand where these activities are focused on. And then you can start to think about maybe solutions to maybe redistribute development more in a more homogeneous way throughout the states. So when you look at the nighttime satellite view of the world, during the nighttime, you can see there's a lot of lights in a lot of places, but these lights don't necessarily represent where people are living. And in the same way, where you see it's very dark, it doesn't mean there's no one there. It just means there's no access to energy. So there is a discrepancy between where people live and where energy is being distributed in the entire world. And it's also the case in Myanmar, of course. There's different explanations for that, maybe in regards to development, especially in the tourism or industrial kind of sectors, where the need for lighting is much more greater in a way. And here, this is like a first map where we're trying to really show where the most people are located that need the most access to energy. So in this first map, we're showing the satellite view. So these three maps represent the small villages within the states where people have the most access to energy based on that nighttime satellite view. And this was all done on Grasshopper. The second one is showing where the most people are living. So the first map is where people have access to energy. The second map is where people are staying. And now this third map is showing where the people who don't have access to energy are staying. And so from this map, this is really kind of a conversation starter rather than a decision-making tool where we can start to evaluate the need for development in the energy distribution sector in the states, and then start to like organize a development scheme for the region. And then some in oranges, potential like mini grids in the area for energy harvesting. And then we try to develop this phone app, but yeah, this is not very important. How are we okay on time? 6, yeah. I have maybe one more project, but if you feel you want to focus more on Q&A, that's also fine.
Yeah, just go ahead. It's okay. We got time.
Okay. So this project is also looking at public space in Yangon. It's called the Urban Tree. So I don't know if you are all very familiar with the notion of ecosystem services. So these are all the different services that nature can provide to people. And there's a lot of these services that exist, especially when you look at, for example, safety, tranquility. There's less noise because it buffers also noise. It has some sort of like healing and calming, also almost like spiritual type of effect. Whereas businessmen, for example, who are very stressed, they go to the public space, there's a lot of trees in nature, then it can reduce the heartbeats, and it can be better for the health. It can also cool the temperature. It has more biodiversity. It can clean the air, of course. So it's very interesting to start studying ecosystem services when you start dealing with public space. And so we were thinking that like how to concentrate. Before I talk about this, I just want to also explain a little bit about gentrification. I don't know if you're familiar with gentrification. It's another notion of architecture that's quite interesting, of the effects of that architecture can have on the city. Um, and there's a very good example of gentrification in New York City that was designed in the that's called the High Line in New York. And the people who designed the High Line actually said that, you know, they weren't completely aware of the surroundings. They really designed it to be a beautiful place, and it is beautiful, but they didn't really take into account the communities that were living there and the people that were living there and the context and the environments. And they're really trying to design the best place the way it is, but with losing focus of where it is. And so the price of the real estate around this pipeline, around this High Line, sorry, increased a lot. And so the people who were not able to pay the rent anymore got kicked out and then replaced by new people. And so this has sometimes, if you don't take into consideration in the design of public space, the context, then it can have also negative effects on the environment in the city from a social point of view. And so we were thinking that one way to mitigate this problem, instead of like concentrating the public space into one focal point, was to distribute. And instead of creating one big public space, let's create thousands of small ones. And so the effect of gentrification in this case would be very, very small because it would be redistributed throughout the city. And to do this, we were looking at different existing local networks that exist in Yangon. And one of them that caught our attention was the bus stops. There are bus stops, like people use buses every day. Almost 80% of the commuters in Yangon use buses to go to work and to circulate in the city. And here you have a quick picture of all the bus stops in Yangon. And there's a lot of examples of these types of like service providing public spaces for energy harvesting, where you can plug your phone for example, shading, for example, lighting at nighttime, for parking your bike. So all these public spaces actually serve specific program inside the city, and there's many examples of it. So this was kind of our starting point of saying, like, if we design some sort of like modular system, and we can make a selection of all the services that we think are useful for a place like Yangon, then maybe we can concentrate them into one single design and then replicate them every time in all these different spaces. So we went through different types of processes of designing. Some of them were using these knobs like 3D printed and then have bamboo, but this was quite expensive. And then we looked at different other typologies of modular systems. And finally, we thought that maybe, yeah, this was just a first proposal. But in this one, you see that it's a little bit more modern because we want to give it a more like kind of a modern feel. And I think that maybe architecture has this ability of also changing perception and bringing something new to the city, a new vocabulary, some sort of like superposition of era where you have the colonial and the modernist and then maybe the brutalist. And so we're able to bring a new vocabulary within the city because we're redistributing this program throughout the city. And in this case, we made a selection of 9 different services that we want to include within this urban tree. So the point is not necessarily, it's not to replace the trees. The urban tree is just a name that we give to this design. But the point is to create a 3D grid on top of which we can start attaching all these different service providers. So some of them were just for collecting the rainwater, for drinking, photovoltaic panels for charging your phone, bird nests, maybe cleaning the air with algae, water vaporization for cooling systems, urban farming, etc. And we had different modules of it according to, for example, if you have a lot of public space or you have very little space, then you can change also the size of, you can choose which one is the best for the specific location. But all of these, so the basic idea is that you have like this modular system when you have the same replicated everywhere, but then it becomes a network and they're all connected to each other. So if, for example, one of them has a lot of shading and it cannot harvest as much sun energy, then the other ones can start distributing the sun, the electricity to that new one. So the point is to create like an off-grid mini grid within the actual grid itself, for all these public spaces to actually be connected to each other. And then if you have a lot of space, then you can start replicating them and create like a more larger scale public space. And all of these are assembled together. So you can prefabricate them, put them on a truck and then deliver them. And then you only need to assemble them on the space. And this is a possibility of a nighttime shot. Okay. So thank you for everyone. I hope you understand my English. I have a bit of a French accent, but if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to take some time and answer.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, the first time I saw your projects, and from, because last time when you showed me, it's only I think it's only the pipeline projects you showed me last time, the playground project. So I'm glad that you developed a lot from last time we met. Now you have some, bamboo pavilions that actually, but firstly, probably I'm going to turn the floor to the students. 谁有问题，中文也可以，好吧？不要求你们来讲英文。那你来，树洞老师要点名让你来。You can actually turn off your share screen so you can see them, I guess. No.
Yeah. Wait, okay. Sorry.
You can stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So 你可以用东北话。Well, probably they're gonna speak in Chinese, whatever. I think you can understand. I mean, I bet they can understand half of it, but in terms of speaking, sometimes they won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
声音大了。过来。Can't really. 过来，麦克风在这儿。OK。Hello。
你好。
在简介中讲到他在中国的那个要怎么走那个什么，然后特别前面有那种。
That's general. Do I need to translate?
Well, I couldn't hear.
Anyway, she's asking actually, since bamboo is kind of popular and it's part of the building material in Myanmar, and especially I don't know in Yangon. Like when you grow up in China, what do you think? How are we gonna push this material in China, and how are we gonna try to make it as a building material as well? Yeah. Actually, do we have any contacts or do you enter any competitions in China specifically that you can use bamboo?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are some similarities with China, I guess, in the sense where the perception of the material is a little similar, where like for let me give you an example. Like in Myanmar, the perception that people have of bamboo construction is like a poor man's material, is used in countryside for poor people because it's very cheap. And this is maybe And so people who starting to have a bit of money, they want to start building in concrete. They want to have aircon. And so we're really trying to show that actually we're able to maybe find ways to regenerate the design and show that it's not just a conventional, traditional way of building, but we can use that same material and then transform it and creating something completely new to regenerate kind of this feeling of excitement towards this type of construction. In China, I think it's a little bit different because China has been, there's a lot of examples of incredible like bamboo work in China, especially like one that comes to mind is Anna Heringer, which is a German architect that built these amazing pavilions using bamboo. So it's a little bit less of a hustle, I think, in China. People accept it much more. In Myanmar, there's a bit more work to do to change that perception. And so that was one of the reasons we were thinking that building this public space in the center of the city in Yangon was important for different reasons, not just for creating more public space, because there are no public space in Myanmar, not enough, but also to show that we can use this material in creating something new downtown Yangon. And so we're really trying to make a change on this perception of the material and to have people accept it more because it has all this background. It can create new more jobs. It can rejuvenate a dying industry and a craftsmanship like culture in the country. And so to make it really kind of clear and visible for everyone to see, having it in the middle of the city was perfect for us to make a statement. I don't know if this response answers his question.
Yeah, actually in China, sometimes we cannot use raw bamboo or raw bamboo directly for building materials. I don't know, actually in your, I don't know, the pavilion showed us, is that a temporary or permanent?
Yeah, so back in the days, and one of the perception of the bamboo is also related to the treatment process of the bamboo. And so before the traditional way of treating bamboo was not very efficient, took a lot of time. And so the longevity, the buildings that were built out of bamboo were not able to live for a very long time. But now that we have this ability to treat the bamboo in a very efficient way, the buildings can live much more long. And we're using simple products like boric acid and borax, which are like sold as for farming actually, and then you have to dilute them in water. And if you do so there are actually like I'd say three main points. The first one is the treatment, second one is the design, and then kind of like the maintenance. And if you do these three elements really well, then actually the design can live for maybe 15 years, 20 years, or even longer. So of course, we're trying through our designs to show that that's possible. So that's why we try to do the treatment as best as we could, the design and the construction and probably maintenance, is to also prove that actually bamboo construction can last for, can be permanent and not temporary.
Yeah, sure. I mean, did you put any reinforcement in the pavilion you built, like concrete or rebars to just increase the integrity?
No, we poured the footing around the bamboo at the base, but we didn't use. So for the playground, we had this small detail for the foundation where the bamboo comes into the floor. You have the rebar that goes inside. Then you make a small hole and you pour the concrete inside. And we didn't use this technique for this one because we used another species, which is the Bambuza roxbo that has a smaller diameter. And so for this one, we just actually we put it in place and then we build like the footing around it. So we poured the concrete around it. So there's actually no concrete and rebar within the bamboo in this project.
Okay. 还有别的问题 They're all camera shy. The students are camera shy, probably similar to students in
还有
your.
吗？
还有，都逼着人家说中文了，你们还要怎么样？Actually, yeah. Go ahead. Okay, yeah.
Hello. I want to ask, when you build a building with bamboo, do you need to follow some architectural code, or just all things are up to the architecture?
Is there any restrictions of building code in Yangon or Myanmar?
Yeah, that's a really good point actually. Yeah, in some countries let me give you an example. When I used to study in Canada, so there was this historical event in Canada in Montreal, and where like all of the houses in the city was built out of wood, and there was a great fire that burned down like 50 or 60% of the city like about 100 years ago, and then they changed the regulations to say that you cannot allow for any more wooden cladding in the city, because they were afraid that we might that the fire can destroy the city again and again. But of course now we know that like how to treat the wood properly, and so this regulation that is based on historical events is no longer like applicable, because we have the technology now to actually counterbalance to make it more safe. And I feel like in bamboo is kind of like the same, where we're going from a very traditional like understanding of the material, and some of the regulation is based on this traditional thinking of the material. But as we make more and more progress in understanding the material, understanding the way of treating it, understanding the way of fireproofing it and stuff like that, then the regulation should follow. In Myanmar, unfortunately, the government takes a long time to, usually like the private companies develop much more than the regulation. It goes much quicker in this sense. So the regulation is still very kind of fragile, and but even though that we know that these materials can be more long lasting. So in terms of regulation, which was strange for this specific project, is that we got the building permits before we delivered the design. And I know it sounds strange, but that's the way it happened. So once we got the building permits, we were kind of able to design what we thought was appropriate for the space. And of course, we had some lot of workshops with the community, and so everyone would accept and then and agree on it, and then we could go forward. But once we got the building permits, then we were kind of able to do what we wanted. But I really feel that this is an important point, and that has a lot of potential, especially here. And one of the notions where I think in the future I'd like to spend some time on, which is kind of like a cross-laminated bamboo. And I think this has a lot of potential, because when a tree grows for 20 years, a bamboo grows for 3, and it's a grass, so it can continue generating. So we could actually build skyscrapers or like large-scale buildings using bamboo, using the cross-laminated kind of technique. And this technique has been used a long time in Canada for wood, for wood constructions, and the tallest building now is 17th floor high in Canada. And I think that there is potential to do this also in a place like Myanmar, where there's just so much abundant resources for bamboo. But so this process would need to go through research. So by testing the material and proving scientifically how reliable or structurally performing this material is from a cross-laminate point of view, then we can move into regulation, and then have the government and politicians change the law to allow for this new construction to take place in cities and in the country in general. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's similar here in China. We don't have a specific building code for bamboo architecture. So normally either we're using the building code for wood constructions, wood architecture, or we're using what we call engineered bamboo, which is, like you said, the laminated bamboo from OSB or other bamboo strips. so that we can, go through building code when it comes to using bamboo as a structural component. But most of the time, especially the project I involved with, is we were just using bamboo for decorations. So in that case, you don't actually need go through the building code as long as it doesn't, fall down, hit someone. So that's more that's a gray area. How we actually using bamboo here. We make it look like a structural piece, but actually it's a, either steel rebar inside it or just concrete beams.
But you have
Okay.
access. What's the range of selection of species you have access to?
Well, Maozhu, right? The one the one that Christoph used for the ZCB bamboo pavilion, that species
is
actually probably that's the most common species we use for building constructions, but not for all the I personally use that for projects that we built recently in Sichuan, but it's not that common that people directly use raw bamboo or the bamboo pole for construction. And especially there's emerging business of engineered bamboo manufacturers, so they prefer to use laminated beams more nowadays. 还有吗? Okay, probably the last questions about yourself, like the question I'll ask you, like why you as a French guy, you started in Canada and you find a job in Tokyo and you leave the developed country and end up in Myanmar doing your own business. Like what brought you to here? I mean, to this stage.
Yeah. I think it started from in Tokyo. I was working for this French company, and like I said, I was working on mostly like conventional architecture projects. So the type of projects that all of you students you probably think of when you think of becoming an architect. I didn't necessarily think that was exactly what I wanted to do, but it was kind of an easy job that I found. So I just like took it and it worked well. I got paid. It was nice. I learned my job. I learned how to actually create projects and deliver them. But it was mostly like very commercial. So I had this frustration as an architect saying like, okay, I'm doing a lot of work and putting a lot of my time into this. And yeah, I'm an architect, but I feel like these projects are not very useful, It's just I'm just working to promote. It feels like there's like a frustration that I had where like the projects I were working on were kind of like a marketing strategy for the company, where we're doing branding design. Like instead of really focusing on the interior design and the well-being of like employees and the way people use the space, the way that you can create amazing places for working environments, most of the design was really focused on the facade of the building, the Instagrammable part of the architecture. And I felt there was a bit of a hollowness in what I was doing, and this frustration grew over the years. And I wanted to maybe develop something new, where not something new, but I'm trying to focus on maybe projects that maybe have a bit more sense of purpose and engagement and agency, and not just like designing a facade. And so I left Tokyo, and coming to Myanmar was kind of random, actually. I can't really explain why. I just needed to leave. I wanted to discover Southeast. I don't know. There was something about Myanmar that seemed like very exotic and fascinating. And as soon as I got here the first time with my backpack, I just knew that I wanted to stay here for a long time. But yeah, I don't really. Yeah, it took me a long time to understand what I was doing here. But after all these projects and things are starting to happen, I'm getting a sense that yeah, I can find my role, like, because like there is an existing like architecture industry in Myanmar, right? Even if it's a very low developed, etc., poor environment, you still have a lot of architecture design companies, and every design company tries to find its specific, like, you know, quality, like a specific role. Like, why would clients go to see them and not others? You know, like, and for me was like, how can I find mine within the existing environments of the architecture environments? And slowly public space became quite interesting, and yeah, it's kind of strange, but it's just kind of like these feelings that I think, especially when you're students, and maybe this is like something you can think about, is that I feel like when you make a decision, there's different ways you make them. The first one is when you use your brain and you're like thinking of, like, for example, where do I see myself in 3 years? Oh, in 3 years, I want to be like this. I want to get this much money. I want to do these types of projects. I want to be in this part of the world, you know. And then you have a list and you say, how do I get there? And so it's very logical, kind of rational way of thinking. And then there's another way of making decisions, which is much more like feeling based, like using your gut feeling. It's like, even though what feels right or what feels like the right thing to do maybe is not exactly rational, uh, but you can see deep down that it's something that you really want to do. And I was kind of following my gut feeling on this, and not so much my rational thinking on it. So it's so hard to like kind of explain what brought me here. That's the closest way I could explain it. And I completely fell in love with this, and then with this place, and now I call Myanmar my home. So it's really become my home now. So there's no reason for me to leave anymore.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the reason I'm asking this is like you said. I mean, because I talked to them when I talk to them, like the most of the students, I think probably half of them are losing their enthusiasm when it comes to design and when it comes to individual practices. Because like you said, when you ask them like, what you're gonna see yourself in 3 years, like most of them saying, okay, probably I'm doing a master degree, or probably I'm just stop doing architecture or architectural design and go for a more easier job to work on, because this market is not good, or as being a, you know, if they become a commercial architect, like you said, it's not that excited. So I'm trying to bring more, you know, like individual practitioners, like, you know, especially like you guys, like how you operate a small, even a home office, at certain area where you can access, even your, you know, yourself is being exotic in the area, but still you can, you know, trying to find some connections, or even, you know, charity, bring some charity uh, into this area so that you can eventually realize your own I mean, intentions or design ideas. That's part of the reason I think I'm asking, like, why um, uh, there should be more options rather than just, you know, go for job hunting after they graduate, or, you know, even graduate from master degree. That's part of the reason. And especially China is a big country. Even they don't, if even if they don't want to go outside the country, China is still big. There's some, you know, certain city or a certain part of China that, you know, probably similar to Myanmar, where you can actually build with not just bamboo, but, you know, local materials, and even work around um, building codes. You know, some young practitioners in China now is actually doing it, because if you just go for, you know, some, you know, rural area in China, you can just do whatever you want without, you know, go through all the administration or I don't know, all the restrictions. So yeah, that's just part of the reason why I'm asking you this. Trying to blow up their mind, you know.
Yeah, I feel that like maybe architecture design, when you study architecture, it doesn't only teaches you architecture, it teaches you also like design thinking. And this is applicable for many different things. Actually, when you look at the percentage of students, there's only a portion of students in this class, for example, that will end up being actual architects. A lot of the students might become maybe graphic design, maybe engineering, maybe building management, maybe maintenance. There's a lot of different like sectors of activities that architecture academics can bring you to. But what I think is interesting in architecture design is that it really teaches you design thinking. And design thinking is not only applicable to architecture, and it's applicable to problem solving in general. And I think that it's kind of like I don't want to be cliche, but it's also kind of like a lifestyle where these skills that you're learning in university, you can apply them to also your private life. You know, thinking outside the box, going through site analysis. All of these are things that we naturally do as human beings, assessing the situation and then coming up with like new ideas. You know, this can be applicable to a lot of different things, not just architecture. So even though sometimes you feel like when you're studying architecture is very niche and you're studying to be that specific thing, it's not necessarily the case. You're actually understanding a new way of thinking that can open up to a lot of different possibilities. That's not necessarily the ones that you have in mind. And also, I think that the last thing I want to say is maybe that like the jobs that we have today, the jobs that you will be working for in the future, maybe today don't actually exist at the moment. And when you look at people who are studying computational design, like or architecture, like 10 years ago, and they became computational designers, this computational design was not even existing. So who knows what in 10 years you will be able to do? Maybe you will be working on jobs that today you have no idea even exist. But the logics behind of design thinking will still be there. And so this is like a kind of like, for me, the greatest lesson you can learn from university.
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably today it's good to have you to give us a lecture today, and I guess the time is around about time. And yes, so after the pandemic and after I know whatever happening in Myanmar, probably I can fly you over to give us more, you know, talks or lectures or workshops. I will make it happen. Probably,
Yeah.
I don't know when this pandemic will end. I don't want to have a 14 days quarantine. So hopefully, because actually it's cheap from Myanmar to here to Shanghai, it's probably I don't know 2,000 RMB, so it's cheap. But yeah, we have to figure it out when the country opens. So
yeah, with pleasure, definitely.
Let's plan for probably the end of this year or I don't know later. Sure, thanks for giving us this wonderful lecture about your practice. And yes, let's keep in touch and yeah, stay safe.
Okay.
I guess.
Thanks everyone. 再见啊，下次见。
Yeah, bye.
好好继续，拜拜。
Okay, we can stop the conference. Yeah. So I'm gonna leave the conference. Yeah.